Well, she's going to put them back in order for me while we do that. During your autopsy, did you determine the height and weight of Mr. Benefield?
I determined the height and the body length, as that's what we measure with the body reclined on the table. I think it's a very close approximation to height. It might not be exactly the same.
Yes, sir. And what was Mr. Benefield's weight at the time of his homicide?
It was 169 pounds.
And the length?
The body length was measured to be 69 inches, or 5 foot 9 inches.
Thank you for converting it for me. And during your external exam, as we discussed, those injuries are documented in these photos as well. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and I'm going to now show you. Sorry, Judge, just bear with me 1 minute. Dr. Vega, we're going to try this one more time. I'm going to show you 86 through 97. Would you mind taking a look at those photos and telling me if you recognize them?
Yes, I do recognize them.
And what are they?
These are photos taken at the time of the autopsy of Mr. Benefield back in September of 2020.
And do they fairly and accurately depict some of the injuries and some evidence that was as they were in September of 2020?
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, Your Honor. At this time, I'd ask to enter states 86 through 97.
No objection. Received.
Thank you. And generally, when you examine Mr. Benefield's body, I'm going to display them up here in just a moment.
Okay.
Did you find injuries on the outside of his body?
I did, yes.
And where were they? And we'll talk about them in detail, but generally, where were they?
There was an injury to the right side of his chest. There was an injury to his right shoulder, and there was an injury to his right leg.
And did he have any injuries to his face or head?
No. Well, he did have to his head. Yes, I'm sorry, not his face.
Okay. And what type of injury was that?
The injury to his head was what we would typically call in medical terminology, we'd call an abraded contusion. That's a swollen and scraped bruise. And it was on the very back of his scalp at what we'd call the occipital protuberance, or the lump at the very back of the head.
And what would that type of injury be consistent with?
Typically, it's from falling backward and striking the head.
And when you were looking at his external injuries, did you have some opinion as to what had caused them, specifically the chest and the leg?
Yes.
Okay. And what did you feel that they were?
They were gunshot wounds.
And did you then conduct an internal exam?
Yes.
And did that internal exam confirm what you felt about that they were gunshot wounds?
Yes.
And I'm going to display behind you states 86. Oh, again. And I believe this is generally what we call an identification photo. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And is that Mr. Benefield as he was in September of 2020?
Yes.
Thank you. And then let's first talk about the injuries you said he suffered to the chest. You said that was a gunshot wound?
Yes.
And how many defects in his body were associated with the chest wound?
There was one defect, and that was on the upper right side of the chest.
And is that what we see here in States 87?
It is, although we're also seeing the injury to his right arm area as well. Actually, that's the one that has the marker on it. The chest injury is just above and to the right of that, at least according to the viewpoint of the viewer of this photo.
And for orientation purposes, this is his right side of his body?
It is, and I'll use the laser pointer to indicate this is the arm injury, and that's the chest injury, just to the right side of his right nipple.
And was there, you said there was only one injury. Does that mean this is an entrance wound?
That's correct.
Was there any, and there was no corresponding exit?
That is also correct.
And did you locate a projectile that was associated with this chest wound?
I did.
And where was it?
It was lodged in the tissues of the left side of the back.
I'm going to show you States 88. I believe that's a close-up of the injury we saw on his chest.
It is.
And then can you kind of orient the jury as to what we're looking at in States 89?
Yes, this is the back of Mr. Benefield's body. He has been rolled up onto his left side. So what we're seeing here is his back, the head here. So this is the left shoulder. The right shoulder would be up here. This is the left side of his back, and it's this purple area right here that represents where the projectile was lodged under the skin and the tissue.
And did you remove it?
I did.
I'm going to show you States 90. Is that the removal process for the projectile from Mr. Benefield's body?
It is. In order to visualize it and then remove it, I made an incision in the skin, which you see here. And then just for documentation purposes, I reflected the skin with the tip of the scissors so that we could photograph the projectile in place in the tissue prior to its removal.
And Dr. Vega, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back to States 89. Where you described his body, but there's some skin discoloration. Can you explain to the jury why his skin looks red or darker?
Certainly. That is what we call lividity. Lividity is the settling of blood in the tissues that occurs after death when the heart's no longer pumping, and the major force acting on it is gravity. When somebody's lying on their back after death, which is typically what we see, we are of the usual process of putting somebody on their back in a dignified position after death. And so the blood typically does settle into the back, and we see this purplish coloration here, which is a result of that. There's some here as well. This area here where there isn't any discoloration, except where the bullet is because this is where the table was pressing up against the skin, and that pressure kept the blood from settling in those areas. So most of this purple discoloration is lividity, with the exception of this area right here, which is due to a little bit of bruising associated with the placement of the bullet there.
And Dr. Vega, I'm going to show you what's been pre-marked as States 14. Would you take a look at that item and tell me if you recognize it?
Yes, I do.
And how do you recognize it?
This is the projectile that I recovered from the back that you could see in the photograph you had up previously.
And other than having been repackaged for trial purposes, does it appear to be in the same or substantially the same condition as when you removed it from Mr. Benefield's back?
It does, yes.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would ask to enter States 14.
No objection. Received.
And Doctor, I'm going to show you States 95. Is this the same projectile that you have there in States 14?
Yes, it is.
And what, if you know, is that red part that's next to the projectile?
This is a small rubber plug that is occasionally found in certain hollow point type projectiles. Not all hollow point projectiles have these rubber plugs, but it's part of the process of creating this hollow point that allows the projectile to expand and deform, as we see in this case here.
Thank you. And so going back to the location of the projectile, based on where the entrance wound was, and the where you found the projectile, did you determine a path of travel that projectile took through Mr. Benefield's body?
I did.
And what was the path of travel?
So the path of travel was one of entering the right side of the chest, striking the fifth rib on the right side, the right lung, the 10th vertebral body on the in the middle of the spine, then the left lung, the 10th rib, and then the soft tissues of the back until it stopped where it is. And that path then, if one were standing upright and straight, would be from the right side toward the left, from the front towards the back, and essentially horizontal. In other words, without angling upward or downward. And again, that's relative to a standing upright position.
Yes, sir. And would you mind, would you be so kind as to stand up and kind of point on your body to where the entrance would be?
Certainly.